Jordan, Lebanon, in just the last week, there have been terrorist attacks there. Now today, just hours ago, 9 gunmen in the Bangladeshi capital of Dhaka entered a restaurant and began shooting and setting off bombs. They have taken hostages. As many as 20 to 30 are still there inside that restaurant. We have no idea the total number of casualties. Let's turn now to Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge, who is live in Washington. Catherine?
Well, thank you, Greg. What immediately has my attention is the number of individuals involved in this plot and the fact that they're using guns, bombs, and then taking hostages in a part of the city which is most likely to have Western nationals. I would caution people against jumping to conclusions about the group involved, because this part of Bangladesh is really kind of a witch's brew of jihadist groups. You have the al-Qaeda group there that began around 2012 under the direction of Ayman al-Zawahiri. This is bin Laden's deputy, who now ostensibly leads the group from in hiding in Pakistan. He has a pretty direct control over these types of operations, and he made a sort of very committed decision to try and develop an al-Qaeda affiliate in this part of the world, which I know is surprising probably to a lot of viewers, because they think of these groups almost only in the Middle East. ISIS also has a very active branch in Bangladesh that in 2015 began to really pick up the pace in terms of its operations, though like al-Qaeda, they've been primarily associated with targeted assassinations, so this would be a departure. But what has the attention of my counterterrorism contacts is that ISIS and al-Qaeda have really been in a competition with one another for supremacy in this area. The sort of one I don't know, sort of to throw a wrench into all of that, there also is a group that has long-standing ties to the terrorists who were involved in the Mumbai terror attack. You'll remember that was a highly coordinated attack on a train station, luxury hotels and restaurants in Mumbai, India, which used guns, explosives, and also took hostages. So you've got 3 different parties here that might be responsible, though we would expect with ISIS they would really declare themselves and brand this as an ISIS attack pretty quickly if that is the case. But I think for viewers at home, the most important takeaway here is that these groups are not isolated to the Middle East anymore. And while we think of India and Bangladesh as not really hubs for jihadist activity, that has really no longer been the case since about 2012, 2013, Greg.
All right. Well, just as you were saying, you would expect ISIS to claim responsibility. They reportedly just have. I stepped over to the computer, and apparently on a website that they use, they have claimed responsibility for this attack. There it is. We just put it up on the screen. Now, we can't verify.
And what's the source on that? What's the source on that? Are they citing a Twitter account, or is it their media organization in Bangladesh?
Looks like their news agency, their own news agency, the Amaq news agency, reporting that ISIS fighters carried out the attack at a restaurant in Dhaka, Bangladesh.
So the Amaq news agency, if I could just step in one last time here, the Amaq news agency is really sort of the banner news agency for ISIS in Iraq and Syria. Okay, so this is, if you will, this, at least on its face, appears to be an extension of that operation. We've been doing some reporting here in the last couple of days about how ISIS in Iraq and Syria, based on a conversation with the government official who was briefed on the intelligence, that they had about a half-dozen cells that were solely dedicated to arming and training individuals for operations outside the region. So what has my attention here is that it is the Amaq news agency, which is ISIS in Iraq and Syria, sort of the mothership, if you will, and not the local media organization for the group in Bangladesh.
All right. Catherine Herridge, Catherine in Washington. Let's bring in Mike Baker, who's a former CIA covert operations officer, now president of Diligence LLC. It's a global intelligence security firm. What about this latest news that the mothership apparently in Iraq and Syria for ISIS, their news agency, claiming responsibility?
Well, I think that we've got to take that with a grain of salt, first of all. I mean,
it could be falsely claiming responsibility.
Falsely claiming responsibility. Look, Bangladesh is a Muslim-majority country, right? And they've had a history of there's been a homegrown extremist movement there for years, going back to the early 2000s, the ABT. And over the past year and a half, we have seen an increase in attacks in Bangladesh, but they've been individual against secular bloggers, against human rights activists, gay rights activists. A USAID employee who was a gay rights activist was killed in April. And so, you know, the concern has been, this is not something that's just developed now with this attack. The concern has been over the past year and a half that we're seeing a new generation of jihadists rising up. And whether they're aligned with al-Qaeda, and Anwar al-Islam has a base there, and that's part of al-Qaeda in the Indian subcontinent. So they're present there. Or whether it's ISIS or whether it's the ABT, this Bangladeshi-based extremist group, remains to be seen. But I think overall the message is exactly what Catherine was talking about. It may surprise people, but this is a global problem. People they need to start understanding
it's not just Iraq and Syria, and yes, to the extent al-Qaeda and the Taliban in Afghanistan and Pakistan and Somalia, but as I mentioned at the top of our introduction here, Istanbul, Lebanon, Somalia, Jordan, in just the last week alone, those 4 places have seen attacks. And of course an ISIS either directed or inspired attack in Orlando, Florida. The tentacles of ISIS seem to extend everywhere.
Right, and from the ISIS command point of view, they don't care. We get caught up because, in part operationally and in part because we're trying to just understand and make sense of it all, we get caught up in, is it a direct operation, like the Ataturk airport? You know, was there a direct instruction and resources provided by ISIS, or was it someone who just latched onto that ideology and committed the act? From the ISIS point of view, they don't care. It's a win. It's in the win column for them.
Right.
It doesn't matter to them. But we are seeing, credit where it's due, we are making some headway in Syria and Iraq. And the more that happens...
Sure. I mean, you know, ISIS has lost Ramadi. They've lost Fallujah.
Right.
They're being encircled in Raqqa and Mosul. They may fall. They may lose those 2 big cities, the second largest city, as well as their essential capital of the caliphate, just days after the 2-year anniversary of the establishment of the caliphate. So while they may be losing geography and territory, they are escalating their attacks.
And that's the perverse reality of this. The more success we have on the ground out there in their caliphate and taking back that turf and denying them that, the more aggressive they are becoming in staging or trying to promote the idea of carrying out these attacks in the West. That's just the reality we have to face. It doesn't mean we shouldn't, you know, step on the gas and do more in Syria and Iraq and take that fight even harder to them. But we have to understand and be pragmatic that it's going to result in more attacks outside.
Do these attacks, high-profile attacks, tend to engender greater recruitment?
Well, not to the degree that having the caliphate and that idea that, you know, look, we've built after all these years, this is what we've been jonesing for, we've now got the caliphate. That was a very powerful recruitment tool. And they were able to use that, and we've seen, you know, the rise in the recruitment of foreign fighters from a variety of places around the world. And so the fact that they carry out an attack at the Ataturk airport or in Brussels or in Paris or, you know, possibly here now in Dhaka, it's not the same. It's not the overriding powerful recruitment tool.
But they can still say, hey, we're in the terrorism business, folks. Join us.
Right.
You know, kill wherever you are, anybody.
Absolutely. And we know, we've seen, this is not ancient history. We know from success against al-Qaeda, they adjust and adapt. They morph to the circumstances. And so we can do everything we can, and we need to take them out on the turf in Syria and Iraq.
Right.
But they will show up elsewhere. You know, people always say it's like whack-a-mole. Well, in a way, it is.
Yeah, I was just thinking whack-a-mole. It really is that in so many different ways, tragically. Mike Baker, thank you very much. We continue to follow the events as they're happening live in Bangladesh, the capital there in the diplomatic quarter. As many as 20 people have been taken hostages as 9 armed gunmen shouting Allah Akbar, God is great, have taken over a restaurant. We are watching to see the fate of those hostages inside, and there's the restaurant. When we come back, we'll be talking to a professor who specializes in terrorism and counterterrorism, and we'll get his thoughts on what's happening here.